The year was 1945. The wind over Texas carried the smell of dust and diesel, the low hum of trucks heavy with prisoners and silence. Barbed wire glinted in the sunlight like thin rivers of silver. Inside the convoy, women sat shoulder to shoulder, uniforms wrinkled, hair bound in kerchiefs, faces turned toward a horizon they could not name. Their boots had once marched for the Reich. Now they creaked against American dirt. They had been nurses, typists, signal operators, the unseen hands of a collapsing empire. When the transport halted, and the door opened to a flood of heat, they stepped out expecting hatred. What they found instead was bewildering calm. The camp sat between two wheat fields, framed by wooden towers and the lazy rhythm of a water pump. A painted sign read, Camp Hearn, U.S. Army PW Compound. It might as well have said, Purgatory with Sunshine. Guards leaned on rifles but did not shout. One of them, a boy with freckles and a crooked grin, nodded politely. "Ma'am," he said, out of habit more than respect. The German women stared at him as if he'd mispronounced a word in a foreign prayer. Helga Brenner was 24, born in Cologne, and still carried herself as though she were in uniform, though hers had been taken in Marseilles. She adjusted the collar of her plain-issue shirt and scanned the camp. Everything seemed out of proportion, the openness of the land, the indifference of the sky. In Germany, fences meant authority. Here, they looked temporary, almost optional. When she spotted a line of women unloading boxes from a truck near the mess hall, she squinted. They were laughing. One swung herself easily onto a horse hitched to a nearby post, her boots coated in dust, her braid catching the sun like copper wire. The guard called out to her, "Hey, Mary Kraus, you ever take a day off?" Helga froze. Kraus. A name she knew from her own childhood street. It echoed like a ghost through the fence line. The first week passed in a confusion of kindness. The Americans brought meals, thick bread, beans, sometimes peaches in syrup. There were rules, yes, but there were also radios. The Geneva Convention hung framed in the command office like scripture. The women expected interrogation, humiliation, perhaps even punishment for being loyal to the wrong flag. Instead, they were assigned simple work, sewing, sorting, tending small vegetable plots within the wire. It felt like mockery, this civility. At night, in the barracks, they whispered about it. One woman, Marta, a nurse from Dresden, confessed she dreamed of her mother's cellar, of bombs falling in rhythm like thunder. Another said she couldn't stand the sound of American laughter. It was too free, too casual, as if war were only a rumor here. Helga listened, but what unsettled her most were the names she heard in passing. Schneider, Bauer, Zimmermann. The same names she had written on wartime rosters. Only now, they belonged to the enemy. A week later, during work detail, she saw the cowgirl again, Mary Kraus. She was loading sacks of flour from a supply truck, sleeves rolled, eyes sharp beneath the brim of her hat. When she spoke to the guards, her accent bent vowels in a way that sounded almost German. Helga found herself stepping closer, drawn by curiosity that embarrassed her. She waited until Mary looked her way, then said softly, "Your name, it is German, yes." Mary wiped her brow and laughed, a quick, bright sound. "Was," she said. "My granddaddy came from Bremen, back when folks thought America was all gold and freedom." The words stung more than intended. Helga nodded stiffly. "And now you fight against the land of your grandfather." Mary tilted her head. "No," she said. "We fought against what it became." She shrugged. "Names don't make a nation. Choices do." Then she swung the sack over her shoulder and walked away, leaving Helga staring after her, unsure whether she'd been insulted or enlightened. That night, Helga couldn't sleep. The barack air was thick with the smell of sweat and wood polish. She thought of her father, a schoolteacher turned soldier who had once believed in the Führer's promises of order. She remembered his voice saying, "Germany needs discipline. The world respects strength." Yet here, strength looked different. It was a girl with a horse, speaking her mind to armed men. Days unfolded like film reels, slow, sunburned, repetitive. The women grew accustomed to the American rhythm. Reveille, work, meals, a faint country tune from a distant radio. Some of the prisoners began humming along, not understanding the words but sensing their warmth. One afternoon, as Helga carried a crate of laundry past the fence, she heard laughter from the other side. Mary and another local woman were teaching a guard's wife to rope a calf. The rope looped wide, missed, then tangled in the dust. Everyone laughed. Even Helga smiled, briefly, before she caught herself. The camp commandant, Captain Reynolds, noticed. He was a pragmatic man who believed that discipline worked best when flavored with dignity. He approved occasional interactions with locals, women volunteering in the laundry or kitchen. "Let them see each other," he said. "It'll remind them we're human." But not everyone agreed. Some American soldiers muttered about fraternization, about soft treatment of Nazis. And among the prisoners, resentment brewed. "They want to make us forget who we are," Marta hissed one evening. "They feed us, yes, but like pets." Helga said nothing. She was thinking of Mary's words. "Names don't make a nation. Choices do." The phrase had settled in her mind like a stone in water, rippling outward. A few days later, Helga was assigned to help stack supplies near the main gate. It was there she saw something she could not reconcile. Mary standing beside a pickup truck, talking to an elderly woman whose accent was unmistakably German. Mary introduced her as her grandmother, Anna Kraus, who had immigrated in 1892. The old woman smiled at the prisoners through the fence and said, in perfect German, "Seid fern von zu Haus, nicht wahr? You are far from home, aren't you?" The POWs froze. For a moment, language dissolved the wire between them. Anna's eyes softened. "I once was too," she added, then turned away before the guards could intervene. That evening, Helga sat on her bunk staring at her hands, the lines etched from years of work, from uniforms and ink and loss. She wondered if home was a place or a memory. When she looked around the barack, women murmuring prayers, others silently mending clothes, she saw not soldiers but refugees of belief. Rain came unexpectedly one night, washing dust from the fences. The sound was steady, like typing on an invisible machine. In the dim light, Helga whispered to Marta, "Do you think they hate us?" Marta shook her head. "No. That would make sense. They do something worse." "What?" "They forget we are dangerous." Outside, a guard whistled tunelessly. Somewhere beyond the wire, a radio crackled with Glenn Miller's Moonlight Serenade. The melody slipped through the rain, familiar in its longing. Helga closed her eyes, imagining the Rhine, imagining freedom without fear. Weeks passed. The women learned to harvest vegetables, to mend fences, to coexist. The Americans tolerated them. Some even treated them as neighbors. A photographer from the local newspaper arrived one afternoon to document life inside the camp. He arranged the women in neat rows near the vegetable garden, the fence behind them glinting like stitched thread. Mary Kraus and two other volunteers stood beside them, holding baskets of produce for the shot. The photographer counted down, 3, 2, 1, smile. Helga hesitated but forced a small, uncertain smile. The shutter clicked, freezing the moment forever, enemy and ally framed in the same sunlight. As the group dispersed, Mary caught Helga's eye. "When this is over," she said quietly, "what will you do?" Helga thought for a long moment. "I will go home," she said finally. "If home still exists." Mary nodded, then offered something like a smile. "Maybe you'll find it looks different than you remember." Later, in the barracks, Helga lay awake while the photograph dried in the command office. She imagined the faces captured in that image, the German women, weary and proud, the Americans, confident and curious. On paper, they would look almost the same. She thought of her father again, of his insistence that heritage defined destiny. Yet here, beneath a foreign sky, she had met her reflection in a woman who shared her ancestors' name but not their beliefs. The realization was unsettling, tender, and terrifying all at once. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of hay and rain. Somewhere, a horse neighed, followed by a woman's laugh that carried through the night fence like a promise. Helga rose, went to the window, and stared out at the blurred line of the horizon. For the first time since capture, she felt something other than fear, something like wonder. But in that same moment, as lightning flashed far beyond the plains, she saw a group of new prisoners arriving. Faces hardened, uniforms darker, men this time, their expressions colder than winter steel. The camp would change. The fragile peace would be tested. Helga turned from the window, her reflection merging with the glass and the ghost of the barbed wire beyond it. Somewhere in the commandant's office, the photograph hung drying, a memory waiting to be misunderstood. And for the first time, she wondered not who the enemy was, but who she had been. Snow came early to Texas that winter, a thin, uncertain dusting that melted as soon as it touched the ground. But for the prisoners, it was miracle enough. The women stood outside their barracks, faces lifted to the sky, as if flakes of home had found their way across an ocean. Helga Brenner held out her palm and watched one vanish on her skin. Around her, the camp had quieted. The war in Europe was over, though peace had yet to arrive in any heart. Letters came sporadically now, smudged with grief, corners bent by miles of uncertainty. News spread through whispers: Berlin in ruins, the Reich dissolved, leaders dead or in chains. Helga read her letter slowly, the words written by her mother's neighbor, not her mother. Your home is gone. The street was bombed in March. We buried her beneath the apple tree. The ink had bled in places where tears must have fallen. She folded the paper carefully and slipped it back into her coat pocket, feeling the shape of loss settle like another ration she must learn to live on. That night, she sat by the stove where the women gathered for warmth. Marta was humming softly, her eyes distant. They say we may be sent home soon, she murmured. Home. The word cracked like thin ice. Helga said nothing. She had begun to suspect that going back was not the same as returning. Days blended into one another. Laundry, meals, the dull rhythm of waiting. Then one morning, a commotion rippled through the camp. A Red Cross truck had arrived, bringing supplies and news. Among the visitors was Mary Krause, her boots caked with frozen mud, her smile as bright as ever. She had come with her grandmother again, this time bearing boxes of winter coats donated by local families. The guards opened the gate cautiously, and the women lined up to receive them. When it was Helga's turn, Mary handed her a coat, thick wool, faded but warm. Found this one at the church, she said. Thought it might fit you. Helga ran her hand over the fabric. Why do you help us? She asked quietly. Mary's smile faltered. Because it's the right thing to do. Even for enemies? Mary hesitated, then said, especially for enemies. That's when it matters. Helga looked at her, searching for the edges of the answer. You make it sound simple. It isn't, Mary said. But it's possible. Later that week, the guards organized a small Christmas gathering in the mess hall, part morale, part mercy. The prisoners baked bread with flour rations, while the Americans brought a record player. When Silent Night began to play, something shifted in the air. Voices joined hesitantly at first, then fully, harmonizing in two languages, Still Nacht, Heilig Nacht. The melody crossed the fence, and for a moment, no one remembered who was on which side. Helga found herself standing beside Mary, both holding candles. The flame flickered between them, fragile, warm. My grandmother used to sing this, Mary whispered. So did mine, Helga replied. Their voices blended into the music, two strands of the same thread, briefly unbroken. But the fragile truce of humanity was not built to last. In January, a new detachment of prisoners arrived. Men from the front, veterans of the Waffen-SS. They carried the war in their posture, their eyes, their silence. The air thickened with old authority. They sneered at the women who spoke with Americans, called them traitors under their breath. One evening, Helga returned to the barracks to find her blanket slashed and a note pinned to it, Schande der Heimat. Shame of the homeland. She stared at the paper for a long time, then burned it in the stove. The smoke rose in tight spirals, smelling of ink and bitterness. That night, she dreamed of her father again, his face half lit, saying, "Loyalty is the measure of a German heart." When she woke, she felt the words slipping away like ash through her fingers. The tension grew. The American guards noticed but hesitated to intervene. Discipline among prisoners was its own uneasy ecosystem. Mary, seeing Helga's bruised arm one day, demanded to know who had done it. Helga only said, "It is between us. You would not understand." Mary crossed her arms. "Try me." Helga looked at her, eyes weary but steady. In Germany, loyalty was everything. Here, it is choice. You live by it, we died by it. That is what I cannot understand. Mary stepped closer. Then maybe that's the war worth fighting. The next morning, Helga was assigned to help repair a fence line damaged by wind. The air was sharp, the sky clear. She worked in silence until Mary rode up on her horse, reins loose, hair whipped by the breeze. "Need a hand?" Mary called. "You shouldn't be here," Helga said. Mary grinned. "Neither should you." They worked side by side, tightening wire, their movements wordless but rhythmic. When the task was done, they stood at the fence's edge, breathing hard, facing opposite horizons. "What will you do when they send you home?" Mary asked. Helga hesitated. "There is no home," she said finally. "Only memory." Mary nodded. "Then make a new one." The words hung between them like a bridge neither dared to cross. A week later, the camp woke to the sound of shouting. One of the new male prisoners had attacked an American guard during a work detail. Panic spread. Shots fired. The air smelled of gunpowder and fear. When it was over, 2 men lay bleeding, 1 American, 1 German. The rest of the day was chaos. Searches, interrogations, anger. The women were confined to barracks, forbidden to leave. That night, rain returned, harder this time, drumming on the roof like an unspoken warning. Helga sat by the window, watching lightning claw the horizon. The guards were doubled. The men's compound was locked tight. She could hear them shouting still, old slogans turned to curses. Suddenly, a knock came at the back door of the barack. It was Mary, soaked to the bone, breathless. "You shouldn't be here," Helga whispered again. "I know," Mary said. "But they're talking about sending everyone back sooner, after what happened. Some of you will be gone within days." Helga's heart thudded. "So this is goodbye." Mary looked at her, rain tracing down her cheeks. "Not if you don't want it to be." She pulled something from her pocket, a small photograph, creased and faded. It was the one from the garden months before, the 2 of them barely visible among the group. She handed it through the door crack. "Keep it, to remember that not everything between us was war." Helga took it, her fingers trembling. "And if they find it, then tell them it's proof," Mary said. "Proof that even fences can't last forever." Thunder rolled overhead. For a heartbeat, the world seemed suspended between lightning and silence. Then Mary was gone, swallowed by the storm. The next morning, the trucks arrived. Orders had come. The first group of prisoners would be repatriated. Helga stood in line, coat buttoned, the photograph hidden against her heart. Marta clung to her hand, whispering prayers. As they were loaded into the trucks, the air smelled of wet earth and exhaust. The guards saluted perfunctorily, their eyes elsewhere. Through the chain-link fence, Helga saw Mary standing near the stables, her hat pulled low, watching. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. No wave, no words, just a silent exchange that said more than any speech could. The truck jerked forward, and the camp began to recede, its shapes dissolving into rain and distance. Hours later, as the convoy rolled across endless fields, Helga took out the photograph. The image had warped slightly from moisture, the edges curling. She traced the faces with her thumb, hers, Mary's, a dozen others caught in sunlight. For the first time, she realized how little separated them. The war had drawn its lines, but the photograph had erased them. She pressed it to the window, watching it blur against the passing landscape. The horizon shimmered with heat, or maybe memory. Behind her, the women were silent, each lost in their own ghosts. As dusk settled, Helga whispered, "Maybe she was right." "About what?" Marta asked, half asleep. "About choices." The truck hit a bump, jolting them all awake. Helga looked out again. Fields, fences, endless sky. Somewhere beyond that, a country waited that no longer existed. Yet within her pocket was proof that something else had survived. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, the photograph caught the light. The faces glowed briefly, as if alive. Helga smiled, a small, tired smile, and whispered, "Not everything between us was war." Far behind them, the camp gate swung in the wind, its hinges creaking like memory refusing to close.